The Pacific dawn rose slow and deceptive, painting the horizon in pale gold, while hundreds of men aboard the Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu worked with tireless precision. Their task seemed simple: prepare the next strike against Midway Atoll. The first wave of aircraft had already returned, damaged but triumphant, after bombing the American base. Mechanics refueled and rearmed planes. Armorers moved torpedoes back into storage, replacing them with bombs meant for land targets. The air smelled of hot metal and aviation fuel. No one suspected that, just beyond the eastern edge of the horizon, the hunters had become the hunted. Admiral Nagumo studied the situation with care. Reports from his reconnaissance planes were incomplete. No sighting of enemy carriers. His mission demanded the destruction of Midway before the Americans could interfere. Still, he hesitated. Intelligence was imperfect, and in naval war, uncertainty was death. He finally gave the order to rearm for a second land strike. Deep below deck, hundreds of crewmen obeyed instantly, unaware that time itself was turning against them. Far across the sea, aboard USS Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, another kind of organized chaos reigned. At 0700, Admiral Raymond Spruance ordered the full strike force launched. "Hit them first and hit them hard," he had said. It took the American crews almost an hour to get 216 planes airborne: fighters, torpedo bombers, and dive bombers. The decks thundered as each aircraft took off in sequence, lifting into the humid sky. Pilots gripped controls tightly, knowing that the next hours would decide whether the Pacific belonged to Japan or America. The Japanese carriers were still blind to this danger. Their returning Midway strike group landed, low on fuel, reporting that a second attack was required to finish the job. Nagumo's order to rearm for land assault was already in motion, but then came the first signal that something had gone wrong. A reconnaissance pilot from Cruiser Tone sent a delayed message: "Enemy ship sighted." The report was vague. How many? What kind? Nagumo could not know yet. Every minute of indecision would now be a blade pressed closer to his fleet's throat. Below the carrier decks, mechanics struggled to undo their own work. Bombs removed, torpedoes reloaded, fuel lines switched, munitions exposed. The hangar decks were packed with combustible death. The air reeked of fumes. Above, Lookout scanned the horizon nervously. The sun rose higher, glaring off the sea, and in that blinding light came the first wave of attackers, slow, old American TBD devastators, flying barely above the waves. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron's Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet was the first to sight the Japanese carriers. They pressed on in a straight line, no fighter cover, no element of surprise. Japanese Zeros dropped from the sky like hawks, their machine guns tearing into the sluggish American planes. One after another, the devastators exploded or crashed into the sea, men barely escaping before the flames consumed them. None of their torpedoes struck. Yet their sacrifice was not in vain. The Japanese combat air patrols, having descended to chase them, left the sky above the fleet momentarily undefended. Up high, unseen, more American squadrons searched in confusion. Wade McCluskey of the Enterprise Group had overshot the reported position of the Japanese carriers and was running low on fuel. Then he saw a single destroyer below, Arisher, racing north. Reasoning that it must be heading back to rejoin the main fleet, he decided to follow. The decision would change the course of the war. Meanwhile, aboard Akagi, Nagumo faced an impossible dilemma. Reports of enemy torpedo planes sighted confirmed that the Americans were indeed near. Should he keep arming for land attack or switch again to anti-ship weapons? The decks were a maze of bombs, torpedoes, and refueling hoses. Any sudden attack now would ignite catastrophe. But without launching, his carriers were defenseless. 11 minutes. That was the window he had before the U.S. bombers appeared. At precisely 1,020 hours, McCluskey and his dauntless dive bombers broke through clouds. Below them lay the Japanese main fleet, spread in a broad arc, decks glistening with aircraft being readied for launch. It was as if fate had painted perfect targets. McCluskey's voice came calmly over the radio. All planes attack. The Dauntless tipped over into their dives. From 15,000 feet, they plunged at nearly vertical angles. Wind screamed, cockpits rattled, bombs armed automatically. Anti-aircraft guns erupted from below, black bursts of shrapnel exploding around them. Lieutenant Richard Best selected the Akagi as his target and released his bomb at 1,500 feet. It struck dead center on the flight deck, piercing into the hangar before detonating among fully fueled planes. Fireballs roared upward, and within moments Akagi was inferno. Kaga and Soryu were hit almost simultaneously by other squadrons. Bomb after bomb found its mark. Flames tore through fuel lines. Munitions exploded, and sailors jumped into sea to escape the heat. Within 6 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers were mortally wounded. The ocean was alive with debris, men, and smoke. The Japanese commanders, stunned, could barely comprehend the scale of the disaster. The invincible carrier strike force that had dominated the Pacific since Pearl Harbor was destroyed in less time than it took to cook a pot of rice. Yet one carrier, Hiryu, remained untouched. Admiral Yamaguchi, fierce and determined, refused to retreat. He ordered his surviving planes armed for immediate counterattack. 2 waves launched from her deck, first attacking Yorktown, which they hit with 3 bombs, crippling her power systems and forcing her to go dead in the water. A second strike followed, believing it was targeting a different carrier, but striking Yorktown again. Fires raged across her decks as her crew struggled to keep her afloat. The ocean stretched endless in gray-blue beneath the afternoon sun, a vast stage littered with smoke and ruin. By 1600 hours on June 4th, 1942, 3 of Japan's proudest carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were burning husks, their fires visible for miles. Only Hiryu remained afloat, her decks alive with frantic activity. Crews rolled fresh aircraft into position. Mechanics refueled under fire warnings, and armorers bolted torpedoes in place with trembling hands. The air was heavy with the smell of gasoline and desperation. Aboard Hiryu, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi stood resolute on the bridge. The man's face was calm, his uniform immaculate despite the chaos. Reports came in that Yorktown, the American carrier his strike planes had hit, was crippled. His staff looked to him, hoping the counterstrikes had balanced the scales. Yamaguchi's eyes, fixed on the burning horizon, betrayed no emotion. He knew they hadn't. Radio intercept spoke of at least 2 more U.S. carriers still launching aircraft. The battle was far from over. At 1,630 hours, Lookout screamed, aircraft approaching from the northeast. Tiny specks grew larger against the sun, glinting silver as they descended in formation. The Americans were coming again. All hands, prepare for air attack. The klaxons wailed. Anti-aircraft gunners swung their barrels skyward, while deck crews scrambled to clear the flight deck. In the hangars below, bombs and torpedoes sat armed, waiting for loading that would never come. From high above, Lieutenant Earl Gallagher and Lieutenant J.G. Best's dauntless squadron from Enterprise formed into attack lines. They had found Hiryu by following her smoke trail, a black scar stretching across the sea. The dive began in silence. Pilots braced themselves as their planes tilted over, engines screaming, altimeters spinning downward. The target filled their windshields, a single carrier, still defiant amidst a burning ocean. At 1645, the first bomb struck. It hit near Hiryu's forward elevator, blowing open the hangar deck. A split second later, the second bomb hit aft, detonating among fueled aircraft. The explosion was apocalyptic. Fire rolled to the hangar, igniting ordnance and splitting steel bulkheads. Men were thrown from their stations, burned, crushed, or hurled into the sea. Those who survived scrambled to fight the inferno with buckets, hoses, anything at hand. On the bridge, Yamaguchi stood motionless, refusing to leave. Flames clawed at the ship from bow to stern. "It's over," one officer whispered, but Yamaguchi shook his head. "There's still honor," he said softly. He ordered the remaining crew to abandon ship, while he and Captain Tomio Kaku stayed behind. Together, they watched their ship burn against the dying light. Witnesses later said they stood side by side, saluting as the heat melted the glass around them. At 1,700 hours, Hiryu was dead in the water. Destroyers Kazugumo and Makagumo came alongside to take off survivors. The decks were too hot to stand on. Hoses hissed steam into the air. The evacuation took hours. Some men jumped straight into the sea. their uniforms catching fire as they fell. Others clung to the side until rescue boats reached them. Around 20-30 hours, with the fires unstoppable, the destroyers moved away. At 0500 the next morning, Hiryu rolled to port, her burning hull glowing faintly in the pre-dawn light, and slipped beneath the waves. Aboard the American carriers, night descended slowly. The sky turned from blood orange to violet, and then to black. On Enterprise, exhausted pilots landed their aircraft one by one, some missing landing gear, others out of fuel. Deck crews guided them in with flashlights and flares, catching planes on arrestor wires or hauling wrecks aside. The smell of burnt rubber and oil filled the air. Some pilots climbed from their cockpits and vomited from nerves. Others simply collapsed on the deck, too drained to move. Below decks, medics treated burns and bullet wounds. The mess halls were quiet. Men whispered about what they had seen. The Japanese ships erupting like volcanoes, the sky raining debris, the flashes of men leaping into the ocean. No one cheered. Victory had been bought with the lives of friends who hadn't returned. Out of the 216 American planes launched that morning, more than 100 were gone. Yet the fleet had prevailed. At 2,000 hours, Admiral Spruance ordered the task force to turn east away from the battle site. "We've done what we came for," he said quietly. Enterprise and Hornet steamed into the night, their wakes glowing phosphorescent under the starlight. Behind them, the Pacific burned. Even from 100 miles away, the glow of the Japanese carriers on fire could still be seen against the horizon. The next morning, June 5th, the ocean was eerily calm. The smoke had faded, leaving only patches of oil and scattered debris, lifeboats, floating planks, bits of uniform, and the occasional body turning gently with the swell. Rescue operations continued cautiously. American sailors pulled Japanese survivors from the water, giving them water and bandages. Many of the rescued stared blankly, unable to comprehend what had happened. In Tokyo, the news of Midway reached Naval headquarters in fragments. Initial reports were confused, first claiming 2 carriers lost, then 3, and finally the full truth, all 4. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the attack on Pearl Harbor, received the message in silence. His hand tightened around the dispatch paper. "The tide of war has turned," he said finally. "We will never recover from this blow." Back at sea, Yorktown still fought to stay afloat, damaged by bombs and torpedoes. She was being towed by destroyer Hammond when a Japanese submarine, I-168, slipped through the screen. 2 torpedoes struck home, sinking both ships within minutes. Even in victory, the Americans paid in blood. By June 7th, the battle was officially over. For Japanese carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, and hundreds of aircraft were gone. The Americans had lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, and many brave men, but they had shattered the illusion of Japanese invincibility. From this moment on, the Imperial Navy would never again take the offensive. For the men who fought at Midway, the memory of that day would last a lifetime. Some would speak of luck, others of strategy, but all agreed on one truth, that the entire war in the Pacific had pivoted on a few minutes of chaos, hesitation, and courage. Those 11 minutes, between Nagumo's fateful delay and McCluskey's dive, had rewritten history. As the survivors sailed home, the Pacific returned to silence. The sea rolled gently, indifferent to the wreckage beneath. The sun rose over the horizon once more, golden and calm, as though the battle had never happened. But for those who had seen the flames of Hiryu burning against the twilight, the ocean would never look the same again.